especially when man's going in and spirit takes over and it's just um downloads that's taking place. What happens is when you jump back into your conscious mind and spirit is flowing, yeah, you just you lost you lose all track of where you was going and so forth. So yeah, man, I got my bro Karen with me.
Yeah,
Big up, my bro.
they are. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, man, nah, man, that's cool. That's cool. Still, all right. So, boom. What man's gonna cover today is still looking at the occult wisdom or spirituality, yeah. And I know for me, and probably you've seen it as well. There's a particular narrative. Let me close this window. 1 second. Ugh. There's a particular narrative around spirituality that I see acting more as a barrier than an actual portal to allow people to go to the next level, right? And with that, there's this there's this association with what we deem spirit or what we understand spirit to be, and a lot of that comes from our religious upbringing, right? It comes from our religious upbringing, which is not nothing to really demonize, because when you get deeper into the studies, you understand religion. All religion comes from a mystery school. They all have esoteric or spiritual elements that they come from. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, for example, Christianity, you can go into Gnosticism to find out more about the mysticism of Christ, right? Same with Islam. You have Sufism, which again speaks to the inner mysteries of Islam, and with Judaism, you have the Kabbalah. So these are where these religions originate from, right? But what we all know is in monotheistic religion, they acknowledge a God that's outside of yourself. You understand what I'm saying? Rather than so yeah, so they emphasize on building a relationship with the God outside of yourself rather than developing an inner connection with the God inside of yourself. Do you understand what I'm saying? And all of the mystical elements of religion point towards that fact. Kabbalah, Sufism, and Gnosticism all deal with developing a relationship or a connection, a oneness with what we refer to as the divine or the creator or the universe, right? And so when I when I teach about spirituality, I I often make it a point not to necessarily go into too much of the deep linguistics around spirituality. You understand what I'm saying? So using all of the fancy words that are buzzwords. Do you understand what I'm saying? Energy beings and vibrations and frequencies and kundalini chakras and all of these terminologies, because I still see that there is a religious understanding of these concepts, right? And that's we can throw away the term religious and let's just use a 21st century mindset, right? There's the 21st century mindset that's trying to grasp on to this ageless wisdom. The 21st century mindset is incapable of grasping those greater truths. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so we kind of have to go into the mindset of these indigenous cultures, of these mystery schools, of these spiritual systems to really comprehend. If we're not really dealing with the mentality of that thought process, then we're just dealing with the decorations. With you understand what I'm saying? We're dealing with the external stuff that's out there. And so, with that being said, see, oh, lost my train of thought. What was the last thing I just said? Dealing
You
with
was talking about the concepts of religion, the origins of it. So obviously
right,
Islam,
right, right.
Sufism. Yeah,
Yeah, right. So I went into the 21st century mindset that we have, trying to understand an ancient way of being, an ancient way, of thinking or looking, or better yet, perceiving. So all of this is a game of perception, levels of perception, right? And so even with that being said, everything that I'm saying is what you will find in a book, the Kabbalion, is a half truth, right? So the book Kabbalion, you want to get, if you're a sincere student on the spiritual path, that's like an essential 101 book to have. Book the Kabbalion, which is a Hermetic text, and anytime you see the phrase Hermetic, you're dealing with Kemetic. So they attribute the Kabbalion with an individual called Hermes, Thoth, who is none other than the ancient Egyptian Tahuti, right? So all of that to say you're dealing with your ancestral wisdom, right? And your ancestral wisdom speaks about this thing called half truth, right? Everything is a half truth. And what they're speaking to is the our human limited capability of perceiving reality, right? Our limited capability of perceiving reality. And as I speak, I'm gonna get some up, right? Because once again, Matrix. You remember that bit in the Matrix where he was speaking about reality? How do you define reality? I don't know if you remember that bit. All
I
right.
can't remember. Is that one or Reloaded or is that the last one? Or
This
is
is the
that the
first
last one?
one. This is the first
First
one.
one.
This is what he says. So
Mm.
Neo says, "Right, this isn't real." Yeah. And then Morpheus says, "Well, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain." I know most people miss that. I know most people miss that because that's dealing with an occult understanding, right? If that's how you define real, based on how you're able to perceive reality, and how we're able to perceive reality is through our five senses, right? Which he just said, our five senses. When you study your five senses, you will see how limited it is in perceiving the universe. The universe is none other than electromagnetic energy. Your five senses is only capable of picking up 5% of that. We know this because on a physical level, we only see a certain level of color or bandwidth, right? And outside of that, we're unable to see X-rays, UV rays, all these different forms of rays or energy or light we're unable to perceive. Same with sound. We know that there's certain sounds we're unable to pick up. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so just by your sight and your hearing, you go about defining reality handicapped. Do you understand what I'm saying? Handicapped. And so this is speaking to a greater truth within the occult element of spirituality, which is the very thing that we idolize is the very thing that we're trying to overcome. I see you got a question, bro.
Yeah. Uh, when you're talking about like the senses, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they say there's only a very small percentage of the brain that we can
Mm-hmm.
actually use.
Right. Yep.
So, I does this mean then that we're only using part of the reason is our like what you're saying is what you perceive is that your brain is only able to perceive a certain amount of um senses on a baseline level. So, because I
Mm-hmm.
know that when you take things like for instance, is it the psilocybin mushroom or
Right.
certain
Psilocybin.
mushrooms?
Psilocybin. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
like you see more colors in your perceptions. Is that the
Right.
brain then being activated to have greater capability, which then
Right.
heightens also
So
your spiritual capability?
no doubt. Great question. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so there's a book called Doors of Perception by Audley Huxley. Right.
yeah,
Doors of Perception, and he's writing down his experiences when he's taking LSD. And
yeah,
within, there's a part of the book where he's speaking about something called the limited valve, right? And what he's speaking to is the very same thing I just mentioned, that on a physical level, we are very limited. We have this small valve that the unlimited is funneled through for us to be able to perceive it on a limited level. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so this reducing valve, which he calls it, is none other than your conscious mind.